Today at CJ Off-Road, we're going to show you how to lift your Wrangler. If you want to make your Jeep perform better on the trail and on the road, then today we're going to look at this Fabtech Trail II Series lift kit fitting your 2007-2018 Jeep 4-door Wrangler. This Fabtech lift kit includes everything to get your Jeep lifted and make it perform better on the trails. It includes lower control arms, a new track bar, springs, braided brake lines, and even extended sway bar links. The stealth shocks that are included with the kit will offer a superior ride with custom valving set up specifically for your Jeep. The control arms and track bar feature a 1/4-inch thick wall with 5-ton Heim joints to ensure that you're going to be safe on the trail and on the highway. Now let's get it installed in our 2008 Jeep Wrangler. The tools required for this install could get pretty extensive, so I just tell you guys to have a basic mechanics tool set. You won't really need anything special. Make sure you have either a lift or access to a jack and jack stands to get your Jeep up in the air, and that should be all you need. We're at the front of our Jeep, and the first step is actually to disassemble and remove all of the factory components. We're going to start with the sway bar end links, remove the lower track bar bolt, and then remove the shocks. Let's get started now. Once you have the front sway bars removed, you can take the factory bolts and hardware and just toss it aside. The kit actually comes with new sway bar links and new hardware. With the front axle supported, we can remove the lower shock mount. It uses two 18mm, one on the outside and one on the inside. Once you pull the shock hardware out, make sure you hang on to it. You'll be using it for your new shocks. With the lower shock bolt removed, we can now remove the upper stud. While we're here, we're going to remove the brake line bracket. It uses a 10mm bolt, which we're going to hold on to for the new bracket. Now what I like to do is actually just thread it right back in there, that way we don't misplace it. And you're good to go on this side. We're going to repeat the same process on the other side. We can get started removing these springs. Now that we have the shock and sway bar link removed from this side, we're actually going to remove the entire track bar. This is going to let the axle droop more to get the taller springs in. We're going to start with this bolt here, work our way down to the other end, because we are replacing this with a new track bar from the Fabtech kit. Now we're going to move on to the lower mount of the track bar. We actually have our steering stabilizer onto a separate bracket here. Let's get that pulled off, and then we can pull off the lower track bar bolt. With everything disconnected, it's now time to lower the front axle and remove the factory springs. With the spring removed, we now have access to the bump stop pad. The Fabtech kit does come with new billet bump stop extensions that we're going to drill the hole here for and get them attached. We're going to mark it with a Sharpie marker and then get to drilling. With the pilot hole drilled, we're going to use a step bit and get it out to a 1/2 inch. Now there are 4 springs with the kit. You're going to look for the one with the wider top here. That way you can put it right up onto this top bump stop. With the bump stop in, we can now put a washer underneath the bolt and then this nut tab. That way when you tighten it down from the top, it doesn't spin underneath. We're going to use a 3/4 inch socket to tighten down this nut. Once the springs are in, we can install the new track bar. Make sure you retain the factory hardware as you're going to use it. The next step is going to be to install the new sway bar links. You're going to use the supplied hardware with the kit to put these on. Once you have the lower bolt through, we're going to raise the axle a little bit. That way we can get the upper bolt into the existing sway bar location. We can tighten them up once the bolts are in. Then go over to the other side and tighten down the sway bar bolts. With everything else installed, let's put the shock on. We're going to tighten up the upper stud and then we'll get to the lower mount. Then you can install the lower shock bolt. Once you have the shock installed, we can now work on the lower control arms. We're going to remove the front location here for the bolt, then we'll move on to the back. Once the front bolt's removed, we can move on to the rear. And you can pull the control arm out. Once you have the front lower control arm out, you're going to get your new control arm. We're going to lay it next to it and figure out the size we need. We're going to get it a rough estimate with the new bushings installed as to the length. Once you have it on the Jeep, you can get it dialed in to really fit your needs. We're going to install the bushings into the fixed end here. Once you get both the bushings installed, we're going to use the supplied grease and just lubricate inside a little bit. Now we can put the sleeve into the bushing. We're going to put the machine sleeves into this end here, and then we're ready to install it. With those installed, we can now put it on the Jeep. We're back to the driver's side of the Jeep, and we can install our new lower control arm. We're going to start with the back bolt here and use the factory hardware. Before we tighten this bolt all the way down, we're going to install the front side. Now that we have the lower joint in, we can tighten it up. We're going to torque it down to 160 foot-pounds after we tighten it up. With everything else installed, we can work on the last part of the front, and that's to install the extended brake lines. We're going to put the new bracket into the factory location with the factory hardware. Once you have the bracket tightened down, install the horseshoe clip. We got the front all buttoned up, now we're on to the rear. We're going to start with the lower shock mount, remove the sway bar, and then this lower track bar mount. We're going to use an 18mm socket and an 18mm box wrench to get the lower shock mount off. Once you get the lower bolt out, remove the top two. Then move on to your sway bar links. It's going to use an 18mm box wrench and a socket once again. Now make sure you hold on to this hardware and the sway bar link as you're going to be reinstalling it. Use a 21mm socket to remove the lower track bar bolt. the track bar bolts removed, we're going to lower the axle down enough so we can get this factory springs out. Then you can pull the factory springs out. Now make sure you keep the spring retainer pad here at the top. You're going to be using that with the new springs. Before we install any of the new springs or go any further, we're going to install the new rear extended track bar bracket. What you'll do is take this piece, slide it over the factory mount here, and reinstall the hardware through here just to tighten it up. Once you have it tightened up, we're going to mark 2 holes and drill them out to 3/8. There's 1 hole on the side here that we're going to mark out, and then 1 actually on the inside of this bracket. We're going to install the second part of the rear track bar bracket around the axle tube and then behind the bracket that we just drilled for. Now before we tighten everything down, we're going to put the U-bolts in through the back and the bottom. And now we're going to go back through and make sure we have everything tightened down that we just installed. We're going to get the upper track bar mount into the new hole here. Install the new upper track bar bolt and then you can tighten down the rest of your hardware. Next step is going to be to put the bump stop extensions. We're going to use a 5/16 inch hardware and go straight up through the bottom. Before we can install the new spring, we're going to install the new braided brake lines here. That way these don't stretch too much when we droop the axle. We're going to break this free here, and then we're going to release the bracket. That way we don't bend the line. Now we can install the new brake line. Now we can install the lower part of the line. Now we can install the horseshoe clip. Now we can install the new spring. Now we can reinstall the lower sway bar bolt. Now I'm going to tighten this down with an 18mm socket as well as an 18mm box wrench. Once you get the sway bar tightened down, we're going to install the new rear stealth shocks. I'm going to loosely tighten those and then do the lower mount and finish up tightening those. Now we'll get the lower bolt tightened up. Everything else is installed. The last step for us is going to be to replace the lower control arms. We're going to start with this front mount here. Use a 21mm socket and get that bolt removed. We got the frame side bolt removed. Now we're going to move on to the axle side. Once you get the control arm out, we have it laid out on the ground here. They're going to be about the same length, and we've adjusted this collar here on the adjustable heim joint. Now we're going to install the sleeves the same way that we did for the front. Put the rubber ports in first, and then we'll put the sleeve in. On this end, we're going to put the machine parts of the heim joint in and use a little bit of grease. Now we're ready to get it installed. Now we can install the lower control arm mount. I'm gonna actually put it up in here first, that way we can get it past our lift and then slide it on up. With the bolts in, we can now tighten them up, 21mm box wrench and a 21mm socket. And we'll do the same for the front. Finally, let's get the frame side bolt tightened up. After that's tightened up, we're gonna go around to all the bolts that we installed or touched and put a paint marker on them. That way we can check this in about 50 miles, make sure everything's good. You're gonna have to go back and make sure that you bleed all of your brakes, and I would get your Jeep professionally aligned before you take it down the road. So we just got finished up installing the Fabtech Lift Kit on our Jeep, and it turned out really great. It added a lot of height to our Jeep. It's gonna give us much better performance off-road and on the highway. With the adjustable track bars and some of the other features that they throw in, this is a really complete kit for you guys. Now, it did take about 8 hours to install, and it would help you to have a lift. However, you can do it with a jack and jack stands. Now, you can find this lift kit as well as many other great parts for your JK right here at cjponyparts.com.